Yo, what's up everyone? My name is Zenitsu, and we are back with another Digimon video. So today is going to be the latest meta report of the event that just happened this past weekend over in LA, and this was an in-person regional, and it was a max-capped regional at 365 players, full 9 rounds, and this was in EX10. So all of EX10 was definitely legal, and, well, we have a lot of decks to be talking about, even though the majority of these decks you've probably already seen before. So let's go over the top 16 archetype breakdown. So as far as the most represented deck in top 16, we have 4 Rocks, followed by 2 Machinedramon, 2 Galaxy Loops, 2 Leviamon X's. So glad to see that not just Momon is the only good Levia X player. We have 1 red-purple Imperialdramon, 1 Phoenixmon X, 1 Gankoomon X, 1 purple hybrid, 1 Gallantmon, and 1 Omnimon. So there's a lot of decks, as I already mentioned, but a lot of these decks are the ones that are doing well, and these are the ones that are consistently doing well. So when it comes to the overall top 16 as far as what actually won the event, that goes to Machinedramon. Well, I mean, technically it's tied for first between like 6 players because they all had the same record because of how Bandai events work. So they just had the best tiebreakers, and that's what led Machinedramon to win. Then in second, we have red-purple Imperialdramon. In third, we have Galaxy. Fourth is Phoenix. Fifth is Levia. Sixth is Ganku. Seventh is Galaxy again. Eighth is Purple Hybrids. 9 and 10 are both Rocks. 11 is Machinedramon. 12 is Gallantmon. 13th is Omnimon, 14th and 15th is Rocks, and Leviamon is all the way at the end at 16th. So let's dive into some of the decks and see some of the differences that these players are working with, starting with the most represented deck, working down to some of the least represented decks. But before we get into that, if you're enjoying this type of content and you want to see more, you already know what to do with the whole YouTube and social media doobly-doo thing, and leave that like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you could stay up to date when I upload or go live next. So, starting things off with the most represented deck, that is going to be Rocks and Minerals. So we have 4 different Rocks and Minerals decks to look at, and I'm guessing that a lot of the core and foundation of these decks are basically going to be the same, and it's just the small little tech choices and differences that's really going to separate them and to make them stand out. So we could see that already with the eggs. The best performing one has a 5th egg, and that's going to be the new Tumblemon for some redirect, just in case they want to have some extra little defense. But when it comes to the 2nd best, 3rd best, and 4th best, obviously they're all just running the one Tumblemon for the consistency on always making sure that you're going to be gaining your memory, because that's one of the most important aspects, is just making sure that you have enough resources to make your power plays. Then scrolling down to the rookies, we could see that, again, there's just going to be a lot of commonalities. Obviously, the one that did the worst out of all of the Rocks decks is running some really interesting rookie selections, because they are also going to be adding in Gatsumon as well as the Floodgate Gatsu. So, yeah, that's kind of an interesting choice. Not everyone, obviously, is agreeing with that, but they are all agreeing on running the new Tsunorizumon paired up with the Searcher and the cost reduction, as well as Ukomon. So we see that the best performing and 2nd best performing are on exactly that. Ratios are going to be changing between them a little bit, just because they need to find room and space to run some of their other tech cards, and we see that the 3rd best one is going to be splashing in the promo Ukomon, just because, you know, might as well add some extra memory gain, and it's just a 5th Ukomon to try to cycle your eggs faster. That's the primary reason why Ukomon is here, but the fact that Ukomon's also searching and digging is also incredibly powerful. Then, if we scroll down and continue on to the level 4s, obviously the promo Landramon is the best Landramon, so they're all running that basically at max. And then when it comes to the other Landramons, it's kind of just a whatever. Then, when it comes to the level 5s, this is where there's just a lot of sameness still. It's just max out on the new Pirogna and then run some copies of the old Pirogna. So that's already pretty decent there. And then if you want, it looks like the best performing one is running the Cyberdramon Ace to try to add some extra de-digivolving, and on top of that, it's an ace, which is never bad, but the more important aspect on why this card's probably being ran is the fact that it's another card to help set up your tamers. So that way you could try to spit out as many clothes and get them on the field as quickly as possible, and because that's how the deck kind of functions, is solely using clothes to refill your inheritables, so that way your magnetic can actually OTK. Then when it comes to the level 6s, this is where we're going to see a lot of differences, because there's a couple of different paths that you could take in order to actually, pilot this deck. And that's like the cool thing is you do have different tech cards that are enabling different combo lines. So you see that the best performing one is literally keeping things as cut and dry and simple as possible, running a combination of the old Pyramid with magnetic. So this way they basically have the double OTK strat where they can OTK off of Pyramid, and then they also can OTK off of magnetic. So that's really good, having the flexibility where if you don't see your level 7, you have your level 6, and if you don't have your level 6, you have your level 7. But if you have both, the opponent is most likely going to be OTK'd, regardless of the situation and high-level Digimon you're going to be using. Then, when it comes to the second best build, they are using the new Pyramidimon, which is what I like to call Battery Pyramidi, because you're mostly just using this card to refill your inheritables to power up your magnetic even more. So they're just running that, doubling down and focusing on magnetic being the OTK card, which I think is fine just because magnetic has flexibility being able to digivolve off of the level 5s as well, but I do personally like having the split between the 6 and 7 being able to OTK, so that way you have more flexibility. And you also need to see potentially less cards. But regardless, they're using battery, and it's not like they're the only one utilizing the battery, because it is commonly seen in all of the other Pyramidi decks. So you're not just hard locked into needing the old Pyramidi, and you could still use the new Pyramidi because magnetic is going to be the focus of the deck. And when it comes to just some other level 6 techs, it looks like Blastmon is a very popular and very powerful tech. This is just a very obnoxious card because of the fact that his ability, which is supposed to be played with Bagra Army, also works inside of rocks as well. So that way you could goad the opponent's Digimon into attacking and then utilize the All Turns ability to detach some of your stuff to be able to disrupt the opponent during their turn, and that could really throw them off. Or if you have enough Tumblemons underneath, then you could kind of time walk the opponent and try to really severely hinder or limit or even just take away their ability to play the game. And that's why this player is also using the Metallicdramon, is because this is a fantastic anti-meta card, because it essentially would stop the opponent from actually utilizing their raising area, and they won't be able to digivolve their Digimon very efficiently on a wide variety of decks. So it really just is a floodgate to hose on the opponent to buy them a single turn, and that single turn could be enough to just line everything else up, because you could just digivolve normally into magnetic and OTK that way. So that's cool that that tech is being implored, but when it comes to what the others are doing, they're just basically doing the same thing. They're using battery for metallic, and that's why they're doubling down on metallic, and this player also is going to be using the Blastmon tech because it fits inside of the archetype. Then when it comes to the closes, there's only 3 close, and you're going to be wanting to run all 3 closes, or at least the majority of players are wanting to run all 3 closes. The most important close is obviously going to be the setter, because this is the close that's going to add the most inheritables for the least amount of effort. Otherwise, you're going to be running some combination of the promo close as well as the EX10 close. The EX10 close is really good because it could play out the other closes. It could help gain some memory in the mid stages of the game, on top of the fact that it also could play out a rookie, which then you could use with the new Tsunorizumon to kind of act like the old close to add even more inheritables to your Digimon. But that's what the promo close is doing, is she's still just an extra way to add more inheritables, which is why she's a very decent and important card. And you can see that these players are just running a combination of their closes. Except for the worst performing Rocks and Minerals deck out of top 16, they're electing not to use any promo, and instead they're just doubling down on the EX10, which is fine. I don't necessarily hate the decision. It's just I like having the flexibility on having a whole bunch of different options just in case I don't necessarily see the one that's going to be working out, because this close still also passively gains you memory at the same time. They're just passively gaining you memory a little bit different, but I guess they're valuing more of the setup and combo potential rather than just being a good card in of itself. Then, when it comes to the options, this is probably where things are going to be very uninteresting for the most part, because they're going to be obviously running some good consistency tools. It's interesting that this player is not running any trainings. So usually training is a staple, as you could see in all of the other builds, just because it's one of the best consistency and tempo tools in the entire game. And yeah, this player is electing not to use it. I think maybe they just feel like they have enough tempo with all of their stuff, or they have enough disruption. I don't know. Regardless, it's interesting that this isn't running it, but one card that they are all running is going to be the Unique Emblem, because this is basically the memory boost replacement for the deck, and it's kind of just memory boost on steroids, because it either helps set up your close or plays out a rookie, which is incredibly strong. And then on top of that, it's reducing the Digivolution cost by 3, which is just fundamentally better than the memory boost at times, because the memory boost will only give you 2 memory, so it limits some of your play lines, and this just optimizes your play lines. And to coincide with some other cost reductions, we do see a little bit of Black Scramble tech being ran, because, you know, it's Black Scramble. Might as well just have a backup plan set up just in case things don't necessarily work out. And on top of that, it's just a basic Hammer Spark for every deck that wants to Digivolve. So yeah, it's just a very powerful card, and you can see that some decks are running other tech cards like Breath of the Gods or the built-in option to try to give more DP and more abilities. So yeah, just good stuff all around, but at the end of the day, it is just an OTK deck. So it's just trying to chip at the opponent, fill up its trash, and then play passively while it just waits and builds up its combo, and then it just combos off and kills the opponent. So no matter which way you're actually going to be building the deck, that's just what the deck is fundamentally doing at the end of the day, and because of that type of strategy, it's still a very strong and viable strategy, proving that this is one of the best OTK decks in the current format. And then when it comes to Machinedramon, we actually do have 2 Machinedramons present, and it's nice to see that both iterations or variants of Machinedramon are able to do well. Obviously, the DM version 2 variant is what we've been seeing a little bit more than the Purple Ukomon variant, and they both have their own sets of pros and cons. But when it came to actually what won the event, that had to be the DM version 2 one. So there's not really anything different about the DM version 2 build outside of the fact that they're going to be utilizing Black Wargreymon Ace, because it's just another Ace target to use with the Vademon, because Vademon already is an incredibly powerful anti-meta tool, not only having good ways to be able to Digivolve up into him quickly and cheaply, but him having his own built-in protection on top of the de-Digivolve, on top of the Tamer Hate, makes him one of the best cards in the current environment. And on top of that, now we have Black Wargreymon Ace to actually have an Ace that has built-in protection is incredibly strong and incredibly important on top of the additional abilities that he's going to have, the extra Tamer Hades or Digimon removal built in, and the fact that he also boosts his own DP, so he's kind of just this own little complete package that you could just run agnostic of everything else. But you still have some other aces to act as some good utility pieces to try to round out what the deck is capable of, and this deck is a very strong deck because of the different tools that it has to leverage not only just Machinedramon, but to utilize some various different aces because of how strong Veidmon is as a card. Then when it comes to the other variant, even though it's not going to be a traditional stack-based deck, it is going to follow in the footsteps of a lot of other like cross-esque based decks where you're just basically trying to play a high-level Digimon out of nowhere, and you do have your Ukomons to help set you up, dig out your cards, fill up your trash and your hand at the same time, as well as teching in some other rookies to be able to help with that game plan. So this player is electing to use Hagurumon for a discard and draw 2, and Tapirmon for a on delete draw 1, so it's going to try to chip at the opponent's security to enable the extra card draw. I know some other players like to use cards that also will discard and draw, like Phoscomon or something, but it doesn't necessarily matter as long as you're just trying to make your deck as consistent as humanly possible. Then it's just a slew of toolboxing when it comes to the level 5s for this build, because you don't necessarily care about playing much of any of them. You could still hard play some of the EX10 cards, but most of the time you're just gonna elect to want to just hard slam Machinedramon, and the big difference between these builds is the fact that yes, you're still both going into Machinedramon, but this is leveraging Veidmon and other tools to be able to handle various different situations, and this is choosing to ignore that entirely and just try to make this big insurmountable wall and double down on it utilizing Chaosdramon and Chaosdramon X. So it's still nice to see both variants of Machinedramon do well, proving that the card does have lots of depth and flexibility on how we could approach utilizing it, and there's no real, in quotation marks, wrong answer as long as you're just playing Machinedramon at the end of the day. Next, we have the two Galaxy decks. So the two Galaxy decks actually do have a decent amount of differences between them, because Galaxy has basically two main ways that you could play it. You're going to play it either toolboxing your top end, or you're going to be focusing your top end on some of the Galaxy stuff and actually go into Grace Nova. But with the toolboxy approach, you do tend to be a little bit more floodgate focused. So it's interesting to see that when it comes to how these decks differ, one deck, obviously, when it comes to its low end, is choosing to take that more focused approach and try to accelerate its own game plan, while you have the other one that's actually playing a slew of additional floodgates and trying to decelerate the opponent's game plan with the usage of these floodgates. So that's already a pretty big difference between the two builds, but when it comes to what they're going to be doing on the top end, because the middle part is usually about the same, we're going to see, again, a little bit of a difference in what they're trying to do, where this is trying to be less focused and more toolboxy, and even though this isn't trying to be focused on Grace Nova per se, it definitely is a more focused version of the deck compared to the other one. So it realistically seems like it doesn't necessarily matter as much when it comes to how you're going to be getting into your top end, as long as you're just trying to abuse the Galaxy engine to basically not pay for your Digivolutions to go up into any kind of a top end. Whether it is going to be something more focused or it's going to be something a little bit more scattered with a whole bunch of additional floodgates. But at the end of the day, it's still just trying to be a very obnoxious deck and slow down the opponent with whatever top end you're going to be using, while having some really good offense and toolboxing potentials because of all of the different cards you're trying to cheese and utilize. And then when it comes to the Levia deck, it seems like we were kind of hoodwinked and swindled as far as what actually constitutes a Levia deck, because we actually have only one real true Levia deck, and this is the Levia deck we all know and love. For the most part, it's very similar to Momon's build, if not almost exactly the same as Momon's build, but regardless, Leviamon is still able to do well even without any changes or adaptations. It's just a very powerful and oppressive Digimon. And when it comes to the other Levia deck, well, it's not actually Levia. I mean, sure, it has a Levia in it, or I guess technically two of them, but I really wouldn't constitute this as a Levia deck, and this is more of just the Growl Loop, utilizing the Cerberus middle part and leveraging the Minerva to be able to try to trigger your on-delete abilities with a couple of extra on-delete enablers with something like Revive from the Darkness and Demonic Disaster. So it's still trying to be a very powerful deck, utilizing the Growl engine to go up into your Cerberusmons, and you do have Cerberusmon Werewolf mode that you're going to be leveraging. So Minerva also has some pretty unique ability to be able to play out Digimon on the opponent's turn when they're playing Digimon. So it does have some extra utility against specific matchups that actually do want to try to play out Digimon. So that could add some extra depth and implementation when it comes to what its matchup spread actually is going to be. And then, like I said, Leviamon is just in here. It's just a very strong card at deleting the opponent's Digimon and being able to hit multiple times, which is again why a card like Demonic Disaster is really good. That's why like Cerberusmon X Antibody is really good, because like you could just go all the way up into a Cerberusmon X Antibody, play out the extra body, and then go into a Leviamon, delete the opponent's Digimon, gain the memory back, and then double swing with Leviamon with the additional Security Tech Plus. And then if you have your on deletes, then you could trigger something like Revive from Darkness or something to be able to try to extend your plays. So yeah, there's obviously a lot that's going on to be able to make this build successful, and one of the big contributing factors to why I think this style of deck is going to be successful is because if you're looking at like where the current state of the meta is, and you're looking at what a lot of people are playing right now, because of the existence of Vaidmon, because of the existence of Black War Greymon, because of the existence of Machinedramon, it really tries to shut down and limit what is even playable when it comes to other stack-based decks, other speed and tempo style decks, and just decks that are leveraging and trying to focus and double down on Tamers. So the less you're focused on Tamers, which is also why Leviamon is incredibly strong, then the better your deck is going to be performing, because then you're denying the opponent some of the abilities on some of their cards because they're trying to tech towards the wider spread of decks, and this deck isn't affected by some of those techs. And another deck that is able to do well because of the fact that it also is kind of dodging some of those strengths that are going to be built into a lot of the shifts in the current meta environment is going to be the Virus Imperialdramon deck. So as you can see, like, even though, yes, it's utilizing a tamer, it doesn't really care about its tamer because its tamer is essentially just an overglorified missed memory boost. So it doesn't necessarily care if, like, it gets deleted or if Vaidmon bounces it back to hand or whatever. It's not the biggest loss for the deck, and this is just a setup card because this is another OTK-esque floodgatey deck where you're trying to use your, like, one-card combo starter to be able to go up into your Shadramon to then enable going up into your level 5 Digimon to DNA, aggress with your level 5, then go into the level 6, then aggress with the level 6, and go up into the level 6.5 is, I guess, the best way I could explain it. But once you're in your fighter mode, if you didn't deal a whole bunch of damage, fighter mode is going to try to lock the opponent out of the game with his floodgate ability, and if he does end up getting deleted, then you just go all the way back down into your one-card combo starter and do the whole thing all over again. So yeah, that's partially why this deck is doing so good, and well, that's a pattern that we've seen a lot of, like, hyper-aggressive purple decks do, is they don't necessarily care if their top Digimon or their main aggressive Digimon gets deleted because they're going to basically be left with something afterward, and then that something is going to allow them to basically restart and redo everything all over again. So yeah, it just makes sense that that's the play pattern that this deck is also utilizing while not playing into the strengths of, like, Vaidmon, Black War Greymon, and Machinedramon. Because if you think about why Imperialdramon, the blue-green version, might fall, is because it is weak against those types of cards, and if those are some of the more prominent and performing decks in the current meta environment, then yes, that's going to shut out the existence of Blue-Green Imperial, because Blue-Green Imperial likes to leverage source stripping because of the tamer, and if you look at something like Machinedramon, it has a slew of abilities you do not want to trigger during your turn when you're trying to go up your stack, so it makes navigating certain play lines a little bit harder and trickier, and that's just in that one matchup. You look at like Vade and Black War Greymon, they also have access to de-digivolve, which is really obnoxious for Imperial, and this deck, because it doesn't necessarily care as much, because it's still going to be left with something afterward, or it could just reset everything up with its one card combo starter, even if the Digimon's deleted and they weren't able to replace it. It's still just going to be a very powerful and performing deck where Blue-Green Imperialdramon literally will be left with nothing when it gets de-digivolved and potentially removed. So yeah, you could see like how and why some of the shifts in the meta are making something like this perform better than the blue-green counterpart. And we could see a very similar play pattern when even looking at the red variant of the Gallantmon engine, utilizing a Phoenixmon top end. And I probably should mention that these decks really aren't teching in for much of anything or changing at all, because they don't really have a reason to, because they're just trying to be as uninteractive as possible. Because what this deck is doing is it's leveraging all of the on-delete abilities it's gaining off of the Machinedramon side of the Growlmon engine, and it's trying to use those on-delete synergies to combo with the Phoenixmon X antibody to not only just hit hard against the opponent, but use to delete yourself utilizing the promo Gallantmon to then play out the Oryu and then have easy access at DNAing into an Alphamon Oryukin while triggering all of your on-delete abilities yourself to actually make your cards even more powerful than they really would have been otherwise. And Phoenixmon X Antibody is just a very powerful card in general, on top of the fact that you do have alternative means to be able to DNA into Alphamon or Ryukin, and even if you don't, you still have the Gallantmon X Antibody that you could tech in just to try to pretend to be a Gallantmon deck and then just be annoying with Gallantmon while you actually try to set up your main combo. So yeah, it's just another deck that's trying to not necessarily give the opponent a whole lot of potential to be able to interact with your Digimon, and you're just trying to formulate this big combo turn to be able to OTK the opponent with. Oh, and just one last thing, similarly to what we just saw with Minervamon, with Leviamon, and with the Virus Imperialdramon deck, this deck really isn't leveraging the usage of Tamers much, if at all, because outside of Cool Boy, it's trying to utilize these generic options to gain all of the instant value and tempo it needs to be able to play the game and close out the game. And even if they do have the Tamer, it's going to be usually a Tamer with an on-play ability, so you already initially got value out of the Tamer, and even though you're not going to be getting the additional value, or you could be missing out on the additional value because of the decks that do interact with Tamers being super prominent and powerful, shutting out a lot of decks. This is why these types of decks are excelling, is because it's not giving those types of decks the opportunity to interact with your Tamers, and if they do, it literally doesn't even matter at times. And if we're talking about one of the forerunners of the current meta environment, we still have Gankoomon doing incredibly well, because it is just a floodgate deck that also has the ability to have complete protection against the opponent's abilities, so that makes it harder to interact with and get rid of your floodgates that are slowing down the opponent. So it's just a cascading slew of problems that just progressively gets worse as the game progresses. So you have the Huckmon that's going to be generating you some draw and discard value on top of additional memory, which is similar to what Sister Mont Blanc is doing, where it's just another draw and discard outlet to try to make the deck that much more consistent. And then you're just going to try to get your Gankoomon X Antibody into the trash, so that way you could hard play a Gankoomon to digivolve into Gankoomon X to give everything immunity, and then you're going to eventually go into a GX, putting another Gankoomon X underneath to give everything immunity again. And then Jesmon GX is going to be the big punch factor because he's going to punch for bare minimum 3 security when he's going to be swinging, and that's already pretty powerful on top of a pretty decent DP and pretty decent protections, so it just makes a very hard card to interact with. As far as what this player is doing differently compared to some others, they're not going to be running something like the Gallantmon promo, and they're also not going to be running Alphamon or Yukon Ace, and instead they're just trying to play a more cleaner version by leveraging just Jesmon GX and just Medieval Gallantmon as some really good cards that they want to have protected under Gankoomon X's ability. Then when it comes to their tamers, they're limiting their usage of their tamers, so if they don't have them, they're not crying about it. So it's not like their tamers really matter because they still have the memory boost that's going to enable them. Sure, it would be nice to get additional value off of Matt because you do have your discard outlets with Huck and Sistermon to gain even more value. So ideally, you're going to like move out, start at 3 memory with Matt, and then Huckmon will discard you a card because he discarded you a card. Matt's going to gain you an additional memory, so you'll go up to 4, and then Huckmon will gain you a 5th memory to start your turn off. So that's already a pretty impressive combo. But again, if you're just hard playing Gankoomon and the opponent can't reasonably out it, it doesn't necessarily matter how much memory you give the opponent at times. Obviously, less is better, but sometimes you can't avoid it. But sometimes the opponent doesn't have the ability to actually do anything and use that memory to mean anything. So the deck does have a couple of weaknesses. I'll mind you that it doesn't like being attacked into with like raid or being forced into attacking with collision and whatnot. So yeah, it doesn't have like complete protection, but it's still a very annoying deck to just try to deal with when it comes to just your deck having passive removal. None of that is reasonably going to be working against this deck, and Digimon Emperor is definitely starting to become another mainstay of this format because of all of the decks that do want to move Digimon out of raising that are rookies that are going to be going up, or just utilizing as rookies. Like this deck is also pretty weak to its own Digimon Emperor, but Digimon Emperor is just another really powerful anti-meta tool that a lot of decks are going to start looking to utilize because of just the natural shifts in where the meta dynamic is going to be heading. But for right now, as we're still trying to figure out what EX10 is actually going to be doing to shake up the meta more than just Machinedramon, we do have a lot of other evergreen decks that are still doing relatively well, like Purple Hybrids, because even though, yes, Purple Hybrids is a deck that's going to be incredibly weak to Tamer removal, it's the fact that they actually have a card that's going to be able to replay their Tamers that's going to be one of the biggest saving graces for the deck, even if you do have to try to take some alternative playlines to be able to reach it, because the deck still is just a very aggressive deck where it's going to be using its rookies as rookies, try to floodgate and slow down the opponent while using Ukamon to try to increase your overall tempo. Then you're going to set up your Tamers to then use with Duskmon, and then Duskmon goes into Velgarmon. Velgarmon deletes itself, triggers the Duskmon's ability to then be able to replay a Tamer, and then you're going to go back up into another Duskmon that you could grab off of your primary Tamer. So yeah, it just has this cute little loop that is still very strong and effective, and even if you can't, you could still just Digivolve on top of like one of your rookies, even though it is going to cost a little bit more, but it's worth it if it means you could still make the Velgar combo to replay a Tamer that the opponent then just tried to out. So you do have a little bit of resilience when it comes to being a Tamer-based deck against the current environment, on top of the fact that because you are just a very fast and aggressive deck, you're going to be utilizing other cards like Arrestdramon Superior Mode to put even more pressure onto the opponent as a strong level 5, and between Velgarmon and Arrestdramon Superior Mode, you do have plenty of targets to delete for your promo Gallantmon to just get free extra attacks, and that's also why your Gallantmon from BT13 is still like one of the best cards to pair up with the promo, is because if you use your Velgar combo, delete your own Digimon, replay a Tamer, and you don't have a Digimon on the field, you already milled the opponent enough where Gallantmon could just come out for free, and then that means you could delete that Gallantmon to play another Gallantmon, assuming everything is living in the security. So it just has a lot of very strong aggressive potential, and the floodgatiness is going to be a very useful tool to try to slow down the opponent at times. So it just makes sense why this deck is also a really strong deck, because it still is leveraging a lot of classic tempo tools, on top of the fact that it's one of the few decks that has built-in option removal, which is going to be very valuable, even though half the time it doesn't even want to use it. It just wants to use this to grab back the Duskmon to continue the combos. The fact that it's still a possibility definitely can throw a lot of decks who have Digimon protection for a loop. But before I talk about the next deck, which is going to be Omnimon, I just wanted to highlight that, yes, Purple Hybrids and this deck and Gankoomon and a couple of others in the top 16 are decks that are vulnerable to floodgates like Digimon Emperor and like Metallicdramon that we've seen other decks think about utilizing. So slowing the opponent's overall gameplay down when it comes to cherry picking certain matchups and looking at what decks are employing what type of strategy and play patterns is going to be a very helpful and useful thing when it comes to cards you want to try to tech into your deck to try to increase your overall performance. So even though, yes, this deck is another deck that's weak to those, this is still just a very strong deck and one of the stronger decks of the format. I do appreciate that this player isn't utilizing the black base that has been popular for Omnimon for a while, and instead they're going to be using BT17, Gabu, and Agu, because these also share the end of turn inheritable ability. So if you're ever caught in a position where you only have one Agu or Gabu and it's the black one, then you can't end of turn DNA because it doesn't have that ability. So it really limits what you're actually able to do when it comes to trying to react and respond to the threats that the opponent could be presenting with. So it forces you to need the other Agu or Gabu to be able to make that DNA play possible. Even though it's increasing the overall output of that DNA play, it doesn't give you access to alternative ways to be able to get up into your Omnimon, even if it is a little bit less efficient. But when it comes to some of the other decisions that this player is using, it looks like they're actually increasing the amount of BT17 Greymon. So this is a good card to hose on the floodgates that are hosing on the Omnimon plays. The fact that with Koromon as your egg, not only is this just, I think, a good draw egg in of itself, but it allows basically your Greymon to count as either Agus or Gabus to enable your DNAs to begin with. Then this Greymon also is really good at being a tamer setter for your Mat and ties, so that could be really important, and it looks like this player is leveraging more of the BT17 Metal Garurumons and War Greymons, so that way they have more flexibility on how they're actually digivolving and DNAing into your Omnimon, even though like overall they are just lower on average. So maybe a good idea would be running 3 of each of them, so that way you have a good healthy split and you have a different depth of tools to be able to figure out how to get into Omnimon as efficient as possible. But when it comes to the actual Omnimon count itself, it looks like it's running just the normal amount of Omnimons. So you still have the Ace, you still have the CS Omni, and you still have Alter S. Even though I do prefer Alter S as the primary one because of the combo potential that this card has, especially if you see multiple Alter S's, or sometimes if you just see one and then any other Omnimon, that might be good enough depending on how the game has progressed and developed. But this player still is electing to use the Mirai for some extra card draw and to be able to set up the Nokia for basically free. And this deck also is going to be leveraging a slightly higher amount of tie tamers, because you do have the BT21 tie, probably for some extra card draw. So that way you could be aggressive with your rookies and then draw some extra cards here to try to find all of your parts and pieces. So that's maybe where they're trying to make up for the consistency, while also being a tie tamer to be able to interact with the Greymon and potentially the War Greymon. And then they're still going to be running the DNA enablers, which is going to be the tie-in mats. So that way they, again, have more tie tamers, on top of the fact that these are going to be refunding you the memory. And the more of these you have on your fields, the more memory you're going to be regaining. So it could potentially take your 11 play cost down to an 8 from the ability, then from an 8 all the way down to basically nothing if you have enough of these set up. And they still want to leverage the EX9 version because it's just more card draw in the early stages stages of the game, and in the late stages of the game, it could just grab back your Omnimon like an Omnimon Alter S that might have ended up in your trash. Then the last card is just the ever so classic Miraculous. It's just one of the best trap setup cards in the game to make for oppressive board states. So yeah, Omnimon's still doing well, isn't a surprise, but it does feel like a lot of decks are able to try to tech into Omnimon and are doing better against Omnimon because of also the increased amount of tamer hate that we're seeing in this current iteration of the format. And then the last deck that we're going to take a look at that made it into top 16 is going to be the one Gallantmon deck. So Gallantmon is, well, still Gallantmon. I really don't know what to say. It doesn't really look like this deck is doing anything different than what some of the other Gallants are doing. Maybe a couple of ratio changes. It looks like they're electing to use the Warper. I know this slot's kind of just optional and flexible for whatever they want. Same thing with the alternative level 4, so it looks like they're just going with some extra memory gain. Then the rest of it is pretty standardized, I would say. They're still going to be running the promo, BT13, and EX9 Gallantmon X Antibody. It's interesting that they're not actually running a BT17 one, but doesn't necessarily surprise me at all. Instead, it looks like they're running a Paladin mode Ace, probably for the Gallantmon X Antibody, just as like an alternative surprise play, because this might be able to hose on the opponent's trash, and if they have a wide field, then you could take advantage of that to basically kill them in a single turn. I think Imperialdramon Paladin Mode Ace actually is a pretty decent card with how many level 7s, like, or decks that are using white level 7s are running around, so it's not terrible. And with how many decks are also purple, it doesn't seem that bad. It's just getting up into there, and setting him up is going to be the hardest part about utilizing the card. But very rewarding if you do, and as far as the rest of the options, it's just nothing incredibly special that we haven't seen before. So in case you're actually curious about the current developments of this format, usually I do this a little bit more professionally in something like Excel, but I decided to keep track of some of the current top performing decks in the current environment, and right now this is the current top 10 decks, and a lot of what we've been seeing are a lot of decks that have been topping for not only just this format, but for previous formats as well. So it really feels like the meta has not really progressed, and right now we're just trying to navigate what Black War Greymon Ace and Rocks and Minerals as a whole are doing to alter some of the matchup spreads in the format. But as you can see, there's still plenty of decks that have been topping. Technically, this is data utilizing not just EX10, but BT22.5 as well, because that's where we came from, and I don't necessarily think literally outside of Rocks and outside of Black War Greymon, the meta is reasonably changing a whole lot, and this kind of continues to prove it. Even though outside of just a tech Black War Greymon Ace, we haven't really seen the deck as a whole perform, that doesn't mean it can't perform in the future with some iterations and testing, because it's still pretty early into EX10, and we do have some time before BT23 rolls around, but how much the format is going to change is going to be up to how fast we can iterate and if we could adapt to where the meta currently is to see if there's any new tools that we could think of to improve the decks that we haven't necessarily seen do well, do better against the current environment. So that's all I really have for this video. Thank you everyone for watching it to the end, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Later.